Hello everyone, this is Sajid Amit and welcome to part 3 of my top of the line or flagship headphone shootout. So those of you have seen part 1 and part 2. In part 1 I compared some of the bassier headphones among the top of the line headphones. So I compared the Focal Stellia, the Focal Utopia, the Audeze LCD5 and the Abyss AB12665 TC. And you saw how that turned out. The LCD5, which I have here, and the TC sort of advanced to this round, which is the final round. And in part 2 of my shootout, I sort of pitted a lot of these airy headphones, so to speak, which had the Susvaras, the SR009S, the SR007 MK1, and the HD800S. And from that part, the Susvara and the Susvara and the SR009S sort of advanced to this final round. So in this round, I have 4 headphones, which I honestly think are the best headphones on the planet. And I'll be comparing them, doing a shootout for you. So I have the LCD5s, I have the Hifiman Susvaras, I have the Abyss AB12665 TC, which I have to stretch to reach. This guy over here. And finally, last but not the least, I'm going to stretch again. I have the SR009S, which I have here, which is connected to its cable. So these, I honestly think, are the best headphones on the planet. And of course, there are headphones that some might consider superior. So the HE1 I've listened to, I've had a considerable time listening to the HE1, and it was amazing, but it wasn't necessarily better than any of these headphones, in my humble opinion. The Shangri-La Senior I've not heard. The Audeze Carbon I'm yet to hear. And the new Stax, the X9K, the X9000 I've not heard yet. So barring those headphones, with this very important caveat, I think these 4 are the best headphones on the planet. Now, I just wanted to compare them for you, and so you know, you get a sense of how I feel about how they compare across different parameters like comfort, build, aesthetics, tonality, technical performance, timbre, and finally genre matching, and what I drive them with, which is an important part, which I'll sort of leave at the end. To jump right in, talk about comfort, I think the most comfortable headphone I have here is possibly the Susvara. The Susvara is very comfortable, and yeah, so this is the Susvara. So these cups are long, so they do sort of touch the edge of my jaw, but it doesn't create any hot spots, and I'm very comfortable wearing this, and I've worn this for hours, for days, and I've had this for a very long time, for more than a year, and I still find this very comfortable. So this I think is, you know, almost reference class in terms of comfort. The SR009S is also a very comfortable headphone. Now, I'm going to be gentle with it. Basically, I think what happens is the cable is not ergonomic, right? Like most E-Stat cables. So that is basically where I think Susvara will take it for me, because, you know, I can't just get an aftermarket cable for this as easily as I can for the Susvaras. So this is basically what, you know, it looks a bit odd, I know, but, you know, it's very comfortable. So that has to be said. What is more comfortable once you're wearing it? This actually might be a little more comfortable than the Susvaras, but this cable is so weird and janky, like I said, most E-Stat cables are, that I think, you know, it coils. So the overall experience, the user experience, you know, I think it's better with the Susvaras in terms of just the comfort, and just because of the E-Stat cables. But I mean, they're pretty similar. And just to sort of finish up, the LCD5 and the TC, if I had to compare them for comfort, I think honestly the TC is more comfortable. The TC is not an extremely comfortable headphone, but it's not as bad as some people make it out to be. There are people who I've heard have sold the TC or are afraid to buy the TC because they think it's uncomfortable, and there are people who have tried it and still find it uncomfortable. One is the weight. I don't think the weight is an issue for me, because it's well distributed. The suspension mechanism that they have, I think it works really well. But I do think, it doesn't necessarily disappear on my head to the extent the Susvara does or the SR009S does, but I do think it's far more comfortable than the LCD5. The LCD5, I think, is an amazing headphone. My only sort of gripe over time that I've developed with the LCD5 is that its stage is narrow, and given given it's detailed, given how detailed it is, given how fast it is, and all that, I do, you know, wish it had a larger stage, because that would make it quite a winner for me. It is sonically still an amazing headphone, which I'll get into, but the comfort is the other thing that I think really bugs me about the LCD5 because it's very clampy, because you can get a sense of how clampy this is, right? Yeah, so subconsciously I feel like I don't wear this as much or use this as much because of the comfort. Audeze has a wider headband, like I've said before in a previous video, and as you might know already. I don't have the headband, the wider headband, and I do plan to get it, and I'll test it and I'll report back. But for now, I think Susvara is the most comfortable, followed by the SR009S, followed by the TC, and then finally the LCD5s. Build quality. In terms of build quality, I think the best built headphone here is the TC. And of course, you've seen videos of cars or Jeeps running over the TC, and it's extremely well built. I mean, but you'll know this. It's just that in terms of comparison, I think the others are not as well built. The Audeze LCD5 is also very well built. The material on the TC, I think, is slightly more premium. This has a whole lot of premium materials as well. I mean, there's a resin here instead of the wood that they went with for the LCD4s. So that, I think, looked premium or more premium. But it still looks like a premium headphone, and it's very well built. So it is I give it high marks for build quality. Right after the TC. And then between the SR009S and the Susvara, this is not an easy one because neither of them are very appealing in terms of how premium the materials are. I mean, they both have lots of plastic. I mean, so this has less plastic, of course. Plastic is not the issue with the Susvara. The plasticky stuff here looks a bit cheap. The grills look beautiful and nice, but yeah, I mean, the overall construction isn't very premium and it doesn't inspire confidence, but Stax headphones do last. Hifiman headphones have a reputation for not lasting, as you know, but not the Susvaras. I think they do step up their QC with their higher end headphones. The Susvaras have had very few complaints, if at all. So, I do think it's generally a pretty sturdy build. But yeah, I mean, it's not the most premium looking headphone. There's elements of it that make it look premium, like I've talked about in my Susvara video. But I do think this wood veneer, which is divisive and as a lot of people call out for looking cheap, I don't mind it as much, but it doesn't look very premium. So overall, I would say that between the SR009S and the Susvaras, I would give the SR009S a slight edge in terms of build quality. So the way I would rank my build quality is that I would give the TC the #1 spot, followed by the LCD5, and then the SR009S, and then the Susvaras. All right, now talk about sound. What is tonally the best headphone here? So of course, tonality, as much as people like to think is an objective criteria or criterion, it's really not, right? Because the TC, for example, is a very good example, and I've talked about this like in my previous, in part 1 and part 2. The TC doesn't have a very traditional tonality. People have started calling it wonky and fun after the Resolve review. But if you look at the TC Head-Fi thread, or even the Susvara Head-Fi thread, you'll see like any Summit-Fi Head-Fi thread on Head-Fi thread on Head-Fi. But you know what I mean. You'll see that people who own the TC love it generally. So TCs, you don't find them very often in the secondary market, and when you do, you see that they hold value really well. It's because people love the TC. Abyss has sold a lot of TCs. And yeah, so I think where I'm going with this is that the tonality here is not traditionally like a Harman tuned tuning, but it is something people like, especially those that like modern genres of music. So I do want to say the tonality is subjective despite objective measurements and frequency response, and a lot of people going crazy about FRs because they think that it is some objective criteria with which to assess sound. The problem with reviews and reviewers who measure is that although the good ones will disclaimer that this frequency response graph is just a target that is a useful reference, blah, 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 they'll still call it an objective criteria. They'll still call it the objective part of the review. So implied is that there's a scientific way of, thinking about tonality, and everyone should adhere to tonality. So with that disclaimer out of the way, if you have a liking for that sort of harmonish tuning, I do think the best tuned headphones are the Susvara and the LCD5. No questions there. These are the more traditionally tuned headphones, and I think they'll appeal to a wider range of people. So these are the best tuned. Now, if I had to rank these two in terms of tuning, I would say the LCD5 is better tuned than the Susvara, honestly. There are things else LCD5 does, the Susvara doesn't in terms of tuning, and then there are things the Susvara does which the LCD5 does not. So just to sort of give you a brief overview of the tuning differences, I do think that the LCD5 has a much better bass in terms of not just its technical performance, but how it's tuned. It's very EQ-able headphones, which means you can EQ this very easily. And you can do all sorts of things with this bass. You can elevate its sub bass, you can add some mid bass punch, which works pretty well. The Susvara doesn't take to EQ as well. But I think what the Susvara has going for it is that it's not as shouty in the upper mid range as the LCD5 is, and it's more airy in the treble. The LCD5 is pretty dark in the treble, but they're both pretty much, sort of like akin to the reference frequency response of Harman 2018, or and in some ways other Harman graphs as well. And I do think that does appeal to people. I just feel like we shouldn't call it an objective criteria, but that's what it is. I mean, I don't want to get into this measurement debate. I do want to say that I personally think, and I agree, that a lot of Harman tuned headphones are great, but I do want to make sort of a comment about the SR009S, because although it is, some people have called this tuning wonky, it's not like it doesn't have any resemblance to Harman, but it does its own thing. So for instance, it's got interesting peaks in the treble. It's an overall and not a very smooth frequency response. However, I think its entire presentation is basically what appeals to people, and I'll talk about this in the technical performance section. But tuning wise, if you're looking for something, let's say a warm tuned headphone, I think you'd go for an LCD5, right? If you're looking for a very referencey neutral headphone, and if you don't care so much about bass but you care a lot about air, you'd go for Susvara. If you want that sort of more air than what a Susvara provides, and a lot of treble, and well done treble, and a very nice mid-range, and a fast bass, perhaps the fastest on this table, you'd go for an SR009S. The bass impact is not that great, as you might know, or might not, but yeah, it is still an amazing headphone for mid-range and treble. And finally, if you want the wonky fun sort of tuning, you'd go for an Audeze. It is V-shaped, or U-shaped, and there's a mid-range recession, which means that with a lot of vocal-centered tracks, I'm not enamored with the TC. But I've come to like it over time with some cable rolling and with the right DAC behind it. The TC, for example, takes really well to the hollow May DAC. The hollow May DAC has this amazing way of making the TC sound very lush relative to what it sounds like of its stock tuning. The hollow May has this way of like accentuating the TC's width of soundstage, openness, bass depth, and all that. So I'll talk about the technical performance stuff in a bit. But overall, I just want to make a point about how well it pairs with the hollow May, and its mid-range recession seems to be somewhat addressed. The hollow May is a bit tube-like, so people do like the TC with tubes, as some of you might know. I prefer the TC with my hollow May and a solid-state amp in front of it. But yeah, I mean, for lovers of bass, this is the best headphone on the planet, I think. If you can sort of, withstand a bit of mid-range recession. So that's it for tuning. I do think that if I had to pick one headphone for tuning performance and say what my favorite or what the best headphone I think is for tuning, it would be the LCD5, an EQ'd LCD5. Again, another reference, Resolve. I do like him. I respect what Resolve does. The Resolve EQ for LCD5 takes it up a notch. And as someone said, it becomes a supercharged LCD5, and it really does. Like, you owe it to yourself if you own an LCD5 to go and check out the EQ profile that Resolve has created. And trust me, this is coming from someone who wouldn't dream of, let's say, EQing an SR009S. I love its pristineness. I love how perfect it is in its imperfections. All the jaggedy edges and all that it graphs. I love how the SR009S performs. So take it from someone who has a high tolerance for tonality quirks and likes different flavors in his stable, and someone who doesn't EQ a lot, that the LCD5 responds massively to EQ and is a game changer once it's EQ'd. So an EQ'd LCD5, I think, is the best tuned headphone on the planet. All right, so that's tuning. technical performance wise, I think all these four headphones are extremely competent. However, I think the LCD5 is slightly less competent than the other four. And that's mostly because of its soundstage, I think. Its soundstage is kind of, it's not completely in your head or a very narrow like a Utopia. You have a Utopia over there, an honorary mention. It's not as closed in as Utopia, but it's really just like a bit wider. So I think over time what has happened is I actually don't like the fact that its soundstage is as narrow as it is. It's neither intimate, nor is it wide. It's sort of this weird in between that I'm not extremely comfortable with anymore. The SR009S is a technical masterpiece. The TC is a technical masterpiece. I think if I had to talk about which is technically more competent, it would be very difficult because it would be either the TC or the SR009S. The Susvara is very technically competent, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's as technically competent as a TC or a SR009S. Susvara does detail retrieval really well. It's not as detailed as an SR009S. It's not as detailed as a TC. The Susvara does soundstage really well. It's not as soundstage. It doesn't have the soundstage width or depth that the TC does. It images really well, but I think the TC images better. It's got great dynamics and speed, but I think the TC has better dynamics and speed, and I think the SR009S has better speed. So, I mean, yeah, honestly speaking, if I had to pick one headphone for technical performance, it would be such a difficult call between the TC and the SR009S, but I just might give it to the TC. Because in addition to being fast, and almost as fast as the SR009S, in addition to having width, which the SR009S does not as much as the TC does, soundstage-wise, in addition to imaging really well, and sometimes in front of you, sometimes around you, out of your head a lot of the times. So in addition to imaging the way it does, which is similar to how I think the SR009S images, it has this sense of tactility, this sense of slam and punch and dynamic energy, macrodynamics as some people call it, which the SR009S does not. So I would say that this is the most technically proficient headphone on my table right now, followed by the SR009S, and then the Susvaras, and then the LCD5s, which I think is technically very proficient, very, very close to Susvara, but I think it loses points for stage, and it noticeably does. So, and finally, timbrely speaking, I think the most timbrely accurate headphone I have here is the Susvara, so that gets, number one rank for timbre. I would say followed by the LCD5, which does sound timbrely pretty good, and the SR009S would be my third pick in terms of timbral performance, and the TC would be a fourth. It's not necessarily the most timbrally accurate headphone, especially if you're playing classical genres, vocal-based genres. Vocals sound a bit dry on the TC. And it does get better with the right chain behind it, and I'll talk about chain in a bit. And finally, timbrely, the E-stat timbre is basically what can put people off with the SR009S. So some people might actually like the TC timbre more than the SR009S timbre. But I think what the TC does well timbrely is that when you play rock, it does sound timbrely accurate, right? It does produce electronic instruments, electric guitars really well, and drums sound really accurate. What it doesn't do is the strings and vocals don't sound as accurate on the TC. Everything sounds E-stat-like on the SR009S, so it's very ethereal, very delicate and all that, and it's really nice. I've come to like it a lot, love it in fact. But it might not be for everyone. It does take some break-in to get used to the E-stat timbre, which is why, it's a close, I think, tie between the TC and the SR009S. Yeah, so that's how I feel about timbre. What I drive these with, and then I'll finally conclude with the ranking of these four headphones. I drive all these four headphones with different things. I feel like the Susvara needs a chord Dave to wake up. It sounds great with the hollow don't get me wrong, and especially if you like a very natural timbre, if you're a big timbre head, and if you're really into naturalness, if you want to maximize the Susvara's naturalness, I do think it needs a hollow DAC. DACs are extremely important as amps are, I think, especially with Amplify headphones, because they're going to lay bare all the sort of characteristics of your DAC. So this needs a this needs a chord Dave, I think. I have a chord Dave and a hollow here, but that's my opinion. A lot of people drive it with the May and love it. Susvara needs a speaker amp. I would prefer a warmer speaker amp. I've tried Susvara, so I like a warmer speaker amp and a totally natural sounding speaker amp with Dave for the Susvara. So for instance, I've loved Hagel with the Susvaras. So that's me and my change for the Susvaras. The LCD5 is much easier to drive, but I wouldn't recommend driving it off like a DAP or something. I mean, you can, of course, and you should if you want to, but I think to do it justice, like it does scale with better quality amplification. You can, pair this with anything from a GSX Mini to, an i5 amp, one of their flagship amps, or there's a bunch of other things. Some people like it with tubes, and it does sound very nice with tubes and it does become slightly more spacious. So that's worth keeping in mind. The SR009S, I think, needs a warm amp and a warm DAC. So it's not as bright as an SR009, the original SR009. So it's slightly more detailed and slightly more forgiving at the same time than the SR009, which is what comes in at a higher price point. But it does, so I drive it with the Kevin Gilmore KG SSHV Carbon, which is a powerful amp, warm sounding. So with that amp and the MADAC, it's never, ever, ever, ever bright. It's always relaxed and beautiful and fast at the same time, which is kind of interesting because it's both relaxed and fast and sort of energetic at the same time. But I've tried this of different DACs and it can sound bright. I do not recommend the Chord Dave for the SR009S. It doesn't sound very listenable after you've heard this with the Hollow May. So if you are an owner of the SR009S or considering getting one, I highly recommend R2R DACs, which tend to be warmer. R2R is natural and all that, but I think at the end of the day, I find that R2R DACs do shave off some octaves off the treble, and they do have a very holographic and very tube-like presentation, which does make things more relaxed and natural. So that works with the SR009S. The TC is an intense performer. It's a lot of bass, a lot of energy in the treble, and it's just an intense experience. It's like having coffee in the morning. I love the TC, but I do think it needs... So I drive it with a Hollow May, which gives it the right amount of tonal richness and sort of enveloping sound. But I like speaker amps with the TC, and the best speaker amp I've tried with the TC is Accuphase E380, which is a high-end speaker amp, which has a natural tonality, lovely sweet voicing, but great stage and energy and dynamics. So the TC pairs really well with Accuphase E380, and people have also paired this with a Chord Dave and a tube amp, but I would prefer to pair it with a Hollow May and a solid state, but that's just me. Now, if I had to rank these four headphones, that would be tough. And I have to admit, I like bass a lot. So if you had, and I've liked bass more and more over the last 1 year, I think, and people's tastes change. Like not everyone's taste must change, but mine does, I think, or evolves. They can even change back. So if I had to rank these headphones, I would say that the LCD5 is number 4. It could be number 3, I think, but it's number 4 because of comfort mostly and stage width. With the tube amp, it's tougher to say it's number 4. It's probably like a tie for 3. The SR009S is my number 3. It could be number 1 had it, it wouldn't be my number 1 because of the E-Stat timbre, which I like as a flavor. It wouldn't be my go-to daily driver forever. The E-Stat flavor is a flavor, I think. This wouldn't be my reference headphone by any means. So this would be my number 3. It doesn't do bass as well as other headphones do. Like I wouldn't listen to a lot of heavy metal with this, although lead guitars sound beautiful on the SR009S. Finally, my 2 favorite headphones are the Susvara and the Abyss 1266 Phi TC, and it's so difficult for me to decide which I like more. I think when it comes down to it, I just feel emotionally more attached to my Susvaras, possibly because they were my first flagship. So I have to give you that, right? The Susvaras were my first TOTL headphone, and I still have a lot of emotional connection with it. I have considered selling the Susvara, though, I have to say. I've never considered selling this TC, which is strange because I honestly think I would rank Susvara number 1. But somewhere, I think I'm thinking of Susvara with my brain as opposed to my heart, because my brain says that this is reference and this is beautiful, and at the same time, a bit of my heart also plays a part because I have all this nostalgia associated with the Susvara because it was my first TOTL. I have never considered selling the TC because there's nothing like this on the market. However, the reason I think I'll rank the Susvara 1, not just because of nostalgia and not just because of things like memory, is that if honestly I had to drive every genre, all kinds of music with just one headphone, I think the Susvara is slightly better all-rounder. Because with the right chain, and if you can change the chain, right? Like with the Core Dave, the Susvara does heavy metal really well. Or not really well, it does heavy metal sufficiently well. It does energetic music sufficiently well. I don't think the TC with the Hollow May and a tube amp still gets to that level of a Susvara when it comes to natural vocal-based music. So what the TC does well, it does exceedingly well. It hits the ball out of the park. But I think the Susvara can still hold its own or play at some level with the TC, even for bass-centered music, because the Core Dave, for example, has this very deep and textured bass, and it complements Susvara's, bass really well. So that's where I'm coming from, guys. So for me, Susvara is still the best headphone on the planet among those that I've heard. The TC is a very, very, very close number 2. The Stax SR009S is a number 3, and the LCD5 is a number 4. Thank you for watching. I hope this was fun and or useful. I'll be revising my rankings on the Amplify Headphone thread on Headphone. Yeah, so that's it for me. And I hope this 3-part shootout was fun, useful, etc. Stay safe, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.